My daughter-in-law told me to go to my room on my 72nd birthday. In my own house. The house I spent 31 years paying off. The house where I raised my son. The house where my wife took her last breath in the bedroom down the hall. And this woman who has known me for 6 years, looked me dead in the eye and said, "Clifford, maybe you should just head upstairs. The adults are trying to have a conversation." I didn't say a word. I picked up my glass of sweet tea, walked to the back porch, and sat down in the dark by myself while 30 people laughed and drank inside my home. That was the night I decided I was done being quiet. Let me back up. My name is Clifford, and I'm 72 years old. I live in Greenville, South Carolina, in a 4-bedroom house on Pembroke Lane that my late wife Helen and I bought in 1993. We got it for $112,000, which felt like the moon back then, and we spent 3 decades turning it into something we were proud of. New floors, a sunroom we built ourselves over 2 summers, a garden in the back that Helen tended like it was her 3rd child. Our actual children were 2, my son Brent and my daughter Marcy. Marcy lives in Raleigh with her husband and 2 kids. She calls every Sunday without fail. Brent is 43, lives 40 minutes away in Malden, and has been married to his wife Vanessa for 4 years. I want to be careful about how I describe Vanessa, because I know how these things go. People hear a story like mine, and they want a monster, someone obviously terrible from the start. Vanessa isn't a monster. She's just someone who decided very early on that my house, my money, my time, and my life were resources to be managed. She's organized about it. Strategic. She does it with a smile. The first 2 years after they got married, I barely noticed. Brent and I had always been close. We used to go fishing every other weekend up at Lake Hartwell, just the 2 of us, same as I did with my own father. After he married Vanessa, those trips got fewer. Then they stopped. I told myself that was normal. A man builds his life with his wife. I understood that. What I didn't understand was the slow creep of something else. It started small. Vanessa would mention, casually, that Brent needed a new truck. Did I know a good deal anywhere? Then it was, could they borrow $4,000? Just until Brent's bonus came through. The bonus came through. The $4,000 didn't come back. I didn't push. Helen had been gone 2 years by then, and I was still in that fog where you just go along with things because fighting takes energy you don't have. Then Vanessa's mother got sick. They had bills. Could they move in with me, just temporarily while they sorted things out? They'd pay rent. They'd help around the house. Brent was my son. I said yes. That was 18 months ago. The rent never materialized. The help around the house meant Vanessa rearranged my kitchen, threw out Helen's recipe boxes because they were cluttering up the counter, and hired a cleaning service that charged me $160 every 2 weeks, a service I did not ask for and did not know about until I saw the charge on my bank account. When I brought it up, Vanessa explained that the house needed professional cleaning, and she'd taken care of it. She said it like she was doing me a favor. I let it go. I told myself she meant well. I let a lot of things go. I let it go when she started using my truck without asking. I let it go when she redecorated the sunroom. Helen's sunroom, the one with the pale yellow walls Helen picked out herself and painted it gray. I let it go when Brent stopped coming to my Sunday dinners because Vanessa had made plans. I let it go when she started answering my phone calls to my son saying he was busy. She'd have him call me back. He usually didn't. What I could not let go was what happened on my birthday. I had told both of them about my birthday dinner 6 weeks in advance. Simple, nothing fancy. I wanted a cookout in the backyard. Marcy was driving up from Raleigh with her family. My old buddy Terrence and his wife were coming. My neighbor Jean, who's been on that street since before Brent was born. Maybe 15 people. I had bought the brisket myself. I had the coolers ready. 3 days before, Vanessa mentioned she'd also invited some people. I asked who. She said just a few friends, her friends, and some colleagues of Brent's. She wanted to make it special. I should have said something then. I didn't. The night of, I came downstairs to find 40 people in my house. Not 15, 40. I didn't know half of them. There were people in Helen's sunroom. There were kids running through the bedroom hallway. Someone had moved all the patio furniture to one side and set up what looked like a bar cart, full bottles of things I'd never bought, in the corner of my own backyard. Marcy found me standing in the kitchen looking at all of it, and she squeezed my arm and said, "Dad, are you okay?" I told her I was fine. I wasn't fine. Around 7 o'clock, I was sitting at the kitchen table with Terrence and his wife Barbara, and we were finally just talking. Good talk, the kind I'd been looking forward to for weeks, when Vanessa came in with 4 of her friends and pulled up chairs. She didn't ask. She started a whole other conversation, louder, and within 5 minutes, Terrence and Barbara were pushed to the edges of a discussion about Vanessa's friend's renovation project. I got up to get more tea. I came back, and the chair I'd been sitting in, at my own kitchen table, on my own birthday, had been taken by someone I had never met. I stood there for a moment. I asked politely if I could have my seat back. One of Vanessa's friends looked at me with this expression I can only describe as mild annoyance, and Vanessa said, and I remember this exactly because I have replayed it every single day since, "Clifford, why don't you go sit on the porch? It's a nice night. The adults are trying to talk in here." The room didn't go quiet. That's what I remember most. Nobody stopped talking. Nobody looked uncomfortable except Marcy, who was across the room and had heard it and whose face went white. I walked to the back porch. I sat down. I could hear the party happening inside my house, in my kitchen, at my table. My brisket, that I had seasoned the night before, was being eaten by people whose last names I didn't know. The candles on the cake Marcy had brought. Marcy had driven 2 hours with a homemade chocolate cake, were lit without me. I sat in the dark and I thought about Helen. I thought about what she would have said. Helen was not a woman who sat in the dark. Helen was a woman who would have walked back into that kitchen, smiled her particular smile, the one that meant business, and handled it in a way that left no room for argument. I had never needed to be that person when she was alive. She handled things. I just loved people, but Helen was gone. And I was alone in the dark on my birthday, and it was time to learn to be a different kind of person. Marcy found me 20 minutes later. She sat down next to me and didn't say anything for a while. Then she said, "Dad, tell me what's actually going on." So I told her. All of it. The bank charges, the rent that never came, the recipe boxes in the trash, Helen's sunroom, the truck, the $4,000, the phone calls that Vanessa answered and Brent never returned. Marcy listened the way she always has, without interrupting, without making it about herself. When I was done, she was quiet for a moment, and then she said, "Dad, you need to call Robert. Robert Callahan is my attorney. He drew up Helen's will. He's been my lawyer for 22 years, and he is the kind of man who does not waste words." I called him Monday morning. That phone call was the beginning of everything changing. Robert asked me some questions I hadn't thought to ask myself. Was my name the only one on the deed? Yes. Was there any written agreement about rent or terms of the arrangement? No. Had I given anyone signing authority on any of my accounts? No. But I'd given Brent my online banking password 2 years ago so he could help me with a wire transfer when I was having eye surgery. I hadn't changed it since. Robert told me to change it that day. I did. He also told me to document everything I could remember. Dates, amounts, incidents. He said to write it down while it was fresh. So that night, I sat at my desk, the same desk I've had since 1987, and I wrote for 2 hours. By the time I was done, I had 4 pages of notes that made me feel sick and certain at the same time. I didn't tell Brent any of this. I didn't tell Vanessa. I went about my days the way I always had, quiet and unremarkable, getting up early, making my coffee, tending what was left of Helen's garden. I let them believe everything was fine. Meanwhile, I was doing a lot of things they didn't know about. I called my bank and reviewed every transaction for the past 18 months. I found the cleaning service charges, 22 of them, totaling $3,520. I found 3 other recurring charges I hadn't authorized, including a streaming subscription and something listed as a household supplies delivery that I never saw any supplies from. I printed everything. I met with Robert twice more. He explained my rights clearly. This was my property, I was the sole owner, and I had the right to ask them to leave with proper notice under South Carolina law. 30 days written notice. He drafted the letter. I also called Marcy and asked her something I've been thinking about for a while. I told her I was going to be making some changes to my estate planning. Nothing dramatic, just updating documents that were overdue. She said she supported whatever I thought was right. I updated my will and made sure everything was airtight. I want to be honest here because I know some people will wonder, did I think about just talking to Brent first? Of course I did. He's my son. I have loved that man since before he took his first breath. I drove his mother to the hospital at 2 in the morning in a thunderstorm, and I cried in the parking lot when the nurse told me I had a boy. There is nothing I would not do for Brent. But I had tried to talk to Brent. I'd tried to sock to Brent. I'd tried 6 times over the previous 8 months. Every time I brought up something, the rent, the truck, the account charges, he would listen with this pained expression and then say something like, "Dad, Vanessa's just trying to help," or "Can we not do this right now?" And then the conversation would end and nothing would change. At some point, you have to accept that the conversation has been had. The answer was the answer. He had chosen. The 30-day notice letter went out on a Thursday. I certified it. Robert sent one copy. I delivered one by hand and watched Vanessa sign for it at the door. She looked at the envelope, looked at me, and for just a moment her composure slipped. She said, "What is this?" I said. "You'll want to read it." Then I went inside, made myself a cup of coffee, and sat in my sunroom, which I was already planning to repaint yellow. What happened next was loud. I want to be honest about that too. Brent called me that night, and his voice was a register I hadn't heard since he was a teenager. He said I was being cruel. He said I was pinning Vanessa for trying to improve my quality of life. He said I'd regret this. He said a lot of things. I listened. When he finished, I said, "Son, I love you, but this is my home and I've made my decision. The 30 days start today." He hung up. Vanessa tried a different approach. She came downstairs the next morning while I was making breakfast, and she sat across from me at the table, calmly, carefully, and she said she thought we'd gotten off on the wrong foot, and she was sorry if she'd ever made me feel unwelcome in my own home. I noticed she said, "if." I told her I appreciated that and that the notice stood. She brought up the money they'd spent improving the house. I asked her to list those improvements in writing and give the list to Robert Callahan. She didn't like that answer. There were 3 more conversations in those 30 days. Each one followed the same pattern, some version of an apology, some version of an emotion. Then, when those didn't work, some version of a threat. The threats were things like, "Brent will never forgive you, and you'll die alone in this house." I wrote all of it down. On day 28, Marcy drove up. She spent the weekend helping me repaint the sunroom. We used the same yellow Helen had picked. I'd found the paint code written in her handwriting on an index card in the recipe box she kept in her bedside drawer, the one Vanessa hadn't found. We painted for 2 days and talked the way Marcy and I used to talk when she was in college, honestly, without trying to protect each other from the hard parts. She told me she was proud of me. I told her I was scared. She said those 2 things could both be true. On the morning of day 31, I was up at 6. I made a full breakfast, eggs, toast, bacon, coffee. I set one place at the table, mine. Brent and Vanessa had packed most of their things over the previous week. They left that morning with a moving truck and 2 carloads of things. Brent didn't say goodbye. Vanessa did. She came and stood in the kitchen doorway for a moment, and I think she wanted to say something, but in the end she just turned and walked out. I heard the front door close. I sat at my kitchen table and finished my breakfast. The house was quiet in a way it hadn't been in a year and a half. Not lonely quiet. Something else. The quiet of a place that belongs to itself again. I called Robert and told him they were gone. He said he'd follow up on the unauthorized charges through the appropriate channels. That process took a few more months, but in the end, between what was recovered and what was documented, I got back just over $4,100. Not everything. Enough. I changed the locks that afternoon. My neighbor Gene came over and helped me. He'd been a locksmith for 30 years before he retired, and he said he'd been waiting for me to ask. We put new deadbolts on every exterior door and a new lock on the detached garage. Then we sat on the back porch and he brought over a six-pack of something cold and we watched the light go out of the afternoon. Jean said, "You doing all right, Cliff?" I thought about it honestly before I answered. "I think so," I said. "Ask me again in a few months. It has been 4 months now. Brent and I have spoken twice. Both times were short and careful, like men who used to know each other and are figuring out if they still do. I don't know where that goes. I hope it goes somewhere good. He's still my son, and that doesn't have an expiration date. But I'm not going to beg for a relationship with someone who let his wife send me to my room in my own home on my birthday. That's not bitterness talking. That's just knowing what I'm worth at 72 years old. Vanessa, I haven't spoken to. The sunroom is yellow again. Marcy's kids call it the sunshine room, and they ran straight to it when they visited last month. I've started sleeping better. I've been back to Lake Hartwell twice. Once with Jean and once by myself, and standing on that dock in the early morning with a line in the water. It felt like something coming back. Helen's garden is doing well, the tomatoes especially. I still talk to her sometimes out there in the garden. I tell her about what's been happening. Sometimes I think about what she would say, and I hear it pretty clearly. I think she'd say, "Took you long enough, Clifford." She'd be right. But I got there. If you're sitting somewhere right now recognizing pieces of this story, someone using your kindness as a budget, someone slowly turning your home into a place where you feel like a guest, I just want to say one thing. You are not being dramatic. You are not being cruel by protecting what you built. You are allowed to take up space in your own life. That's not revenge. That's just knowing what comes next. I'm Clifford. I'm 72. I live in my house at my table, in my sunroom with the yellow walls. Where are you listening from today, and what would you have done? I've thought a lot about what it actually takes to get to a place like the one I got to. Not the legal part. That was straightforward once I made the call. I mean the internal part. The moment when a person stops absorbing everything around them and starts asking, what am I actually willing to accept? For most of my life, I thought patience was the highest virtue a man could have. My father was patient. My father-in-law was patient. The men I respected growing up were quiet and steady, and they didn't make scenes. I carried that with me for 72 years, and I confused it, I think, with wisdom. But patience without discernment isn't wisdom. It's just delay. What I was doing in those 18 months wasn't being the bigger person. I was just postponing a reckoning that was always going to come. Vanessa didn't become who she was overnight. And I don't say that to excuse her. I say it because I think the honest thing is to recognize that what happened in my house built up the way all things like this build up, gradually, almost invisibly, one small concession at a time. She moved a piece of furniture. I said nothing. She threw out Helen's recipe boxes. I said nothing. She answered my son's phone. I said nothing. Every silence I gave her was a green light I didn't know I was giving. That's not her fault entirely. That's mine. What changed on my birthday wasn't rage. I want to be clear about that. I didn't go to Robert's office because I was furious. I went because I finally understood something I should have understood sooner. The way you are treated in your own life is, in large part, a direct result of what you teach people to expect from you. Vanessa had learned, correctly, that I would absorb almost anything. The consequences of that lesson landed on my porch on my 72nd birthday, alone in the dark, listening to strangers eat my food. There's a kind of cause and effect that doesn't announce itself. It accumulates. What you allow grows. What you protect survives. I had stopped protecting anything that mattered. My home, my time, my own sense of what was reasonable. And I watched it all get quietly claimed by someone who simply moved faster than I was willing to react. That's the part that required the most honesty to sit with. Not what she did, what I permitted. Brent is my son, and I love him in a way that doesn't require explanation. But love, real love, the kind that has any self-respect in it, is not the same thing as unconditional availability. I had confused those two things for years. I thought to love my son meant to never push back on anything that came packaged alongside him. I was wrong. The most honest thing I could do for both of us was to stop pretending that what was happening was acceptable. That's not cruelty. That's just clarity. The 4 months since have taught me something I'll carry. Dignity is not something other people grant you. It's something you maintain or abandon by your own daily choices. I abandoned mine a little at a time over 18 months, and I got it back the same way, a little at a time, starting with a phone call on a Monday morning and ending with yellow paint on a sunroom wall. Helen would understand that.